Let's bring in Don Debar right away. Don, how you doing today?
Doing all right. What's up, Pasta? How you doing?
Dude, I'm just doing it, man. Thanks for coming on. Everybody on the show loves you. They say thank you for introducing us to Don Debar. I announced the other day that you'll be going to Russia to observe those elections. It's very exciting. I wish I can go with you, but there'll be many more trips in the future.
Yeah.
Where my piece went. There'll be many more trips in the future.
Yeah.
But listen, I want to get your opinion on this Tulsi situation because you know what I'm saying? I know we were going to talk about AFRICOM. We're going to talk about the new bases in Somalia, but I just brought it up here. Look at this right here real quick. I'm going to play this full screen, Don. I want to get your opinion. This is Tulsi Gabbard who spoke today at CPAC, right?
Right.
And let's hear what she's got to say and then give us your opinion on her speaking at Mar-a-Lago.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Aloha. It's wonderful to see you all here again at such a critical time. Our democracy is under attack. The perpetrators of this attack are those who, in the name of saving our democracy, are destroying it. I don't use these words lightly. Every one of us who loves this country and who cherishes peace and freedom should be very alarmed by those who, driven by their insatiable hunger for power, are actively undermining all that we stand for. And almost every single day, if you're paying attention to the news and the headlines, there is some new assault and some new attack. Now, it's the Democrat elite and the swamp creatures in Washington who are doing all that they possibly can to keep us, the American people, from a very simple thing, having the freedom to choose who we want to be our next president. And it is clear through their actions they have no respect for us, and they have no respect for our fundamental rights as citizens of this democratic republic. They are so terrified that we, the people, may make what they think is the wrong choice. In the name of protecting democracy and saving us from ourselves, they're actually destroying our democracy and taking away our freedom. Now, we look throughout history and we can see many examples of evildoers who find some justification, who believe that they are doing the right thing. And so today we see the Democrat elite say with great concern in their voice that if the American people elect Donald Trump again, they warn us he will destroy our democracy. They say he will be the dictator in chief, that if he's elected, it will be the last election this country sees. It's laughable. It is so crazy, it's laughable. But they're justifying their actions by telling themselves that they need to destroy our democracy in order to save it.
All right, Don, I got to bring you in really quickly to talk about this because there's certain things she's doing that is pretty funny, right? Like she's using certain language, evildoers. I mean, that was a buzzword for the conservatives for quite some time.
Yeah, pronounce it right. It's evildoers.
It's
evildoers.
Yeah. And the Democrat elites, right? Now it's not just elites across the board. It's not the establishment. It's Democrat elites. I mean, it is a CPAC crowd. What are your thoughts right away? Do you think that she is one of, I mean, I don't know if you saw the last segment. I saw you there. I hope you were listening, but she's going to speak at Mar-a-Lago. $12.50 a plate, baby. You know what I'm saying? Cheap price over there. But she's going to go speak in Mar-a-Lago. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think she's going to be the vice president pick or maybe Secretary of Defense? Your thoughts. And also your thoughts on her complete transformation to being a conservative now.
Well, my first thought at $12.50 a plate is an open bar. Because if it's open bar, then I can make that work. The conversion of Tulsi Gabbard from whatever I guess people called her before, progressive to conservative, is actually, it's a movement that one could achieve by standing still. Because contextually, everything shifted. Right is left, left is right. You know, these things are they're not the same as they were 10 years ago, even. George Bush was on the right. God help us. John Kerry was on the left, according to the terms of the day. And now, Joe Biden is on the left and Donald Trump on the right. Do you want to have a war with Russia? Joe Biden or whoever is speaking into the microphone? Yes, of course. Trump, nah, it's a bad idea. What will they do in terms of policy? This is something else. We're just talking about, the visible shit show aspect of it. First of all, in my mind, the thing that has changed really is that it used to be that people who were actually of the left didn't play to this shit show. They looked at, as my grandmother would say, watch the hands. They would see what people were doing and they would deal with things, in those terms. You can't even credibly argue that Joe Biden is president right now. And so that raises for me the first question when we're talking in the context of who's saving whose democracy is if Joe Biden is not the actual president right now, who the hell is? And who elected them? How did they become president? Who is making war with Russia and rattling, the bombs at China and making war on the Palestinian people and all of the other things that are going on this planet right now? Who is doing that stuff if it's not the guy that people think they elected? Cloud over the election or not? And by what mechanism? In other words, who really holds power? The levers of power that are available to the United States government are, they're unrivaled in history, unprecedented. And there is a mechanism as antiquated, as anti-democratic, as, magical as it may appear, and as corrupt as it is at least, a mechanism that you can point to. And so you can say, well, this policy came as a result of these people who attained power through these mechanisms. But we don't even have that where we can do a forensic like that at this point. The people who are occupying positions of power are completely invisible to us.
Yeah.
We get, we see
the shadow government, right?
Shadow at best. I mean, shadows are visible at least. They may not be clear, but they're visible. I guess our shadows are Jake Sullivan, that whole legion of talking heads that go to State Department.
What do you think about Tulsi then? Do you think that she is, because people were saying, like, she's an honest player. She just can get things wrong. But she seemed to twist and turn a lot. She put on a pretty heavy pretzel move over here. Her glorifying and going down to Africa, which we're going to talk about AFRICOM next, right? Yeah. But she has talked about that, going after jihadists and radical groups out there and whatnot. But she knows damn well, and she said it before on the campaign trails, and, she understood that the American foreign policy apparatus funded a lot of these groups. So was she playing the long game a long time ago, or is this her just now pandering to a crowd where she sees an opportunity?
Well, first of all, I don't know that it's possible to make that determination without a, crystal ball and a, spy satellite and, I don't know what else. And also that assumes a static model that she is what she was and she's unchanged and has had a steady, game running, as opposed to what's more likely for a lot of these politicians, completely situational response. Whatever is happening right now, what's the best thing in it for me? And that's what I'll do. So I can't answer that question in the way that it's framed. I can answer it, however, answering more or less what she was talking about, in terms of the, evildoers and all of that, and also connecting to AFRICOM. So, they're describing these new bases that they're going to build in Somalia. There's an article at responsiblestatecraft.org.
Yeah, right here.
The U.S. government's plan to train Somali security forces at the newly established military bases in 5 different parts of Somalia. There's a backdoor strategy not only to expand the U.S. military presence in Somalia, but to position the U.S. more assertively vis-a-vis the other powers in the region. You can read into that Russia and China and, by the way, the Africans themselves, who are asserting again their independence against European and American colonialism. And we've been seeing that particularly in the changes in and around ECOWAS in West Africa, beginning perhaps with what they call here a coup, with the national uprising in Niger, and that spread like wildfire around North and West Africa and sent the French running back home to Paris. And so they're talking about, this is something that's been ongoing back to at least the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, that expanded the ability of the U.S. to wage war via surrogate forces in places where it has not formally declared war, with the broader objective of countering the influence of China and Russia in particular. In other words, there's an ongoing project to take not just the abuse of the Constitution that we use now to make war, where the Constitution provides that Congress has to declare war, and that has been slowly eroded to where they blow stuff up at will and litigate for a while until the war's over. And once in a while, the Supreme Court says, you probably shouldn't have done that. And then they do it again. That apparently is too restrictive for the president. And so under the NDAA in 2018, and since then, they've been carving out more and more space to say, well, it's not making war if we take over the military of Africa and then turn it against anyone else that dares to wash up on the shores, even though our interests would be served with our money, with our weapons killing our adversaries, quote unquote. It's not a declaration of war, and it doesn't require any affirmative act outside of funding from the U.S. government. This is the operating environment that she would be carving herself a position in. And until she starts talking about that, she's full of shit.
I agree. And I want to provide a little context really quickly. Jamie, if you can put me up a little bit bigger. The Black Agenda Report. We just showed this, by the way, what Don was talking about. The U.S. links Inc.'s deal to build up 5 new bases in Somalia. But for those of us who've been paying attention to, this is by the Black Agenda Report, and this is by Glenn Ford and Neil Bailey. This is from 2018.
Nellie Bailey. Yeah.
Nellie Bailey. I'm sorry. Not Neely. Nellie Bailey.
And the late Glenn Ford. God bless his soul. Yeah. Obama militarily occupied Africa. In the 8 years that Barack Obama was president, AFRICOM went from 3 military bases to 84. 3 to 84. The first African-American president in the United States, Barack Hussein Obama, went into Africa and loaded on up, spread his imperialism all over the continent known as Africa. On the continent, said Mr. Paul Pumphrey, the co-founder of Friends of the Congo, speaking at a conference against the U.S. and NATO bases in Dublin, Ireland. Between 1996 and 2006, the U.S.-backed regimes of Rwanda and Uganda, by UN estimates, killed over 6 million people in the Congo. And Don, that was to make sure that the country was destabilized. We can then extract all those rare minerals for pennies on the dollar, all the Western mining companies, take all that, all those raw materials for the 4th Industrial Revolution. And then people will say, oh, no, Donald Trump, though, he was okay. No, they had all these bases that Barack Obama had set up. He brought the drones over there, and then Donald Trump armed them. Remember this one over here? The U.S. is moving ahead with a $1 billion arm deal and sale to Morocco. The Trump administration is moving ahead with a $1 billion weapons sale to Morocco. Reuters news agency reported on Friday, a day after the United States announced that Morocco had agreed to normalize diplomatic ties with Israel. Citing unnamed sources familiar with the deal, Reuters said that the Trump administration sent a notification to Congress about the proposed arms sale. Now, the thing I want to point out, we could bring Don back to as well, there was an article not too long ago, several years ago, that when Congress learned that there were several thousand troops in Africa, they were stunned. They didn't even know what's going on. And this has been quietly happening under the nose of everybody right now for quite some time. We have been armed up to the T in Africa, and it's not just to get those raw materials, those rare minerals. It's to push back against countries like China and Russia that also have a lot of deals going on.
So we're really turning that continent upside down. I mean, there's a bunch of children that are still working in the Congo to this day in the mines. They're not going to school. They're not properly getting fed. They're not having a good quality of life. They're children working, slaves in a mine, Don.
Yeah. Look, I don't know. People are familiar with the inauguration speech of John F. Kennedy. That's ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country and such. It was January 20th, 1961. That's when he was inaugurated as president. Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon were president and vice president from January 20th, 1953 until that date that John Kennedy was sworn in. 3 days before Kennedy gave that speech, the U.S. government, CIA, and the Belgian security forces murdered the prime minister of Congo at the time, Patrice Lumumba, who was the first post-independence head of state in Congo after having thrown the Belgians out. The same minerals that they want now, particularly coltan, from Congo, which is the richest country by far in the world with that particular essential material. It makes your cell phones work, for example. The people of Congo decided, okay, well, now that we have this stuff, we're going to start using it to raise the level of development of our country and our education and our healthcare facilities and housing and everything else. That, of course, was unacceptable to the U.S. government in particular, and to the Belgians, who had murdered millions and millions of Congolese. There's a movie you should watch. What is it?
Rwanda?
What's it? White King, Red Blood, Black Death, or some such.
No, I heard about that movie too as well.
Yeah, because rubber was another thing. In any event, so there was engineered a secession. All of a sudden, there was an independence movement inside Congo for a part of Congo known as Katanga Province, which coincidentally was, as what's his name, Trump would say, that's where the coltan was. They wanted independence from Congo, and they looked to Belgium and the United States to sponsor that. That's how fortunate. And this is the context in which Patrice Lumumba was murdered, and they did a Jimmy Hoffa on him. His body was, mutilated and scattered to the four winds. And also, it took the life of Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations, who originally was on the side, as this matter spun through the UN, of the U.S. and Belgium, and became so disgusted with when he saw what was actually happening, he went on a peace mission to try to put down the uprising in Katanga and reconcile the parties so that Congo would have its independence, remain intact, and be able to engage as a sovereign state. His plane went down in the middle of that process, and so that effort was put aside. In any event, since 1961, there has been war in Congo that's taken the lives of tens of millions of people. It's the bloodiest conflict that's been fought on this planet since that time, including Vietnam War and including all of the other wars that the U.S. has made, and it's not ever spoken about in this country, in the media, or anything else here. It's not covered like that at all. And so you have a history, the colonial period, the slave trade, all of the things that have happened between Europe, the United States, Africa, in the last 500 years or so. You started to see real uprisings and independence movements, come to fruition, particularly in the post-World War II period, in the chaos that ensued from the, breaking up of some of the colonial empires. And then a reassertion of colonial influence and power to a degree where they were like, okay, you can have political rights somewhat. We just want to keep extracting the goods and making money, to where the United States came up with a scheme to directly occupy Africa militarily on the cheap. This was established formally during the last year and a half of George Bush's term. They set up something called Africa Command. It's one of the commands of the U.S. military. You've got Southcom here. You've got the command that is sort of CENTCOM, they call it. It's the Central Command in Europe and Middle East, etc. And what is now AFRICOM was part of that. Actually, this was like the colonial world, the U.S. military occupation of it. They parceled out Africa as a separate entity to be occupied in a separate way by a separate subordinate command structure. And what they did was go from country to country and negotiate to establish military bases, and ultimately, in terms of anti-terror operations, which they suddenly needed, where these forces would either partner or be subordinate to American command and control.
Yeah.
Now, when Barack Obama was elected in November of 2008, the U.S. had, as you said, 3 military bases on the continent. No one wanted them.
Yeah.
And because any government that would acquiesce to it, the people would throw out. Everyone knew this. And you had Muammar Gaddafi, who was funding all kinds of independent development projects and infrastructure for Africa to achieve real economic independence, so they could deal with their role, that they inherited as a provider of raw materials and such, and do like was done with OPEC, for example, where they used that to fund their own development to free themselves from the harness of that. And the same with Laurent Gbagbo, who was trying to organize for himself and the other former French colonies relief from the French Franc regime, which they were inherited when they obtained their quote unquote independence as part of the cost of independence, that our currency will be printed in Paris by the French. So this was the condition that existed when Obama took office January 20th, 2009. And by December of 2010, the war that had been going on almost since the day Obama took office resulted, and a presidential election that was intended to settle it was upturned by terrorist activity that was supported by the United States and the French, and resulted with the removal of Laurent Gbagbo, the elected president according to the law of that country, removal at gunpoint from the presidential palace, and the installation of a guy who came out of the IMF. That was December of 2010. February of 2011, suddenly Susan Rice is at the United Nations complaining about Gaddafi and the Libyan government are shooting civilians who were protesting and such. And by March 20th, Obama's on television announcing a bombing campaign against Libya that lasted 7 months. Ended up with the destruction of the infrastructure of the country, the removal of the government, the independent government, the Jamahiriya, the self-governing entity that governed Libya, the installation of a separate Al-Qaeda and other terrorist squads dividing the country up, and the murder of Muammar Gaddafi on YouTube by raping him with a bayonet.
You can't even say the slow systematic removal and destruction of Africa. It was done so quickly and so swiftly. And I think a lot of people turned the blind eye because this was an African-American president, and they didn't think to question him on this. And it happened just right under everybody's noses. I mean, when you talk about Libya, you went to Tripoli before. And I also want to point out the fact that Muammar Gaddafi wanted to start his own currency backed in gold, right? But it was one of the safest, awesomest place to go visit in Africa. People talked about Tripoli all the time. The quality of life for the people, what they did for a newly married couple, I think it was free water, free education, all these things that the state provided. It was amazing. All gone now. Now they have a slave trade in Libya, and Obama was behind it all.
So By October 20th, 2011, Libya war is over. By June 30th, 2012, 35 countries in Africa have correspondent relationships with, in other words, are tie their militaries into command and control arrangements with the U.S. military. In other words, America's first black president performed the ultimate act of servitude to white supremacy by delivering Africa to the military control of the United States.
And what do we have right now in front of us as well? You can see it's still going on. I mean, I think that some people found some form of like hope seeing a lot of these military coups, which seem to be representing more of the will of the people, getting rid of these puppets and these dictatorships, like in Niger and where else? There's a couple places. Burkina
Faso was all over.
Yeah,
and ultimately,
Burkina Faso, right?
Also, they're back at in Cote d'Ivoire now too. Cote d'Ivoire is also, the people there are like, can we go back to being independent again? So yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. Hey, look, people do not acquiesce, easily, and you can't oppress them forever without them, rising up again and again and again. And this is who we are. It's who our species. This is how we've survived every asshole dictator that ever showed his face to us over the history of time, since the first gorilla came down, beating his chest and took charge of the only banana tree in town. This is what we do.
This is what we always done, and we'll continue to do it since the birth of the United States. War is our business, baby.